My brother-in-law stole from me years ago, now he's broke and begging to move in, but I shut the door on him and his entitled family. I'm a 39-year-old woman, and I've been married to my husband Dan, who's 41, for the past 12 years. We've got 2 kids together. I met Dan back when I was in my mid-20s, and at the time, he was living with his younger brother, Bran, who's now 35. That takes us back about 15 or 16 years ago, right when Dan and I first started dating. Bran was still in college then, crashing with Dan in a rented 2-bedroom condo. As things got more serious between me and Dan, he eventually asked me to move in with them. It made sense. Dan was covering all the bills on his own, including Bran's expenses, and having me there would help lighten the load. At the time, I was renting an apartment with a co-worker, and it wasn't cheap. Plus, the long commute to see Dan was wearing us both down. After about 6 months of dating and falling hard for him, I agreed to move in. Everything felt easy at first, comfortable, even until I started noticing strange little things going missing from my closet and wallet. It began with coins disappearing here and there, and I didn't think much of it because, honestly, I'm extremely forgetful. I mean, I have to write all my passwords in a diary or I'll lose them forever. Sometimes I forget to reply to texts for days or have this nagging feeling I'm forgetting something important, but I just can't figure out what it is. So when it was just a few cents vanishing, I chalked it up to my bad memory. Then it turned into dollar bills. It wasn't happening often enough for me to track, so I figured I was just being sloppy with my budgeting. Around the same time, I also realized some of my things were disappearing, mostly makeup at first. I assumed I was leaving it at work or maybe misplacing it after a party. But the patterns started to form. The missing items were always new or barely used. That's when I brought it up to Dan. He thought maybe I was leaving stuff at the office or that someone at work or at a party was swiping from my bag. There wasn't any real reason to suspect it was happening at home. I mean, it was just the 3 of us living there, 2 guys and me. Occasionally, my friends would visit, but I couldn't imagine any of them stealing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. So I created this little theory in my head that someone at work must have been the one stealing. That's when I started getting more careful. I even bought a new perfume, and I made a point of storing it right in the closet. 2 days later, it was gone. That was the moment everything clicked. Whatever was happening, it was happening at home. And the only person it could be was Bran. I didn't want to accuse him without proof, so instead of saying it outright, I told Dan I wanted to catch a friend I suspected of stealing. I pitched the idea of setting up a camera in our room, focused on the closet. Dan wasn't thrilled about having a camera in our personal space, but once I told him it wouldn't show the bed, he gave in. I think he was just tired of hearing me complain about my stuff going missing. So I bought the camera, set it up, and invited some of my friends over for the weekend. While Dan kept a casual eye on them, I already knew in my gut who the real thief was. That night, we had a full house. My friends got drunk and passed out at our place. Dan and I ended up sleeping on the couch in the living room since his friends took over our bedroom. It sounds wild now, but that was how we partied in our 20s, over a dozen people squeezed into one space, everyone just crashing wherever. The next morning, we checked the footage. Sure enough, the camera caught someone going through our stuff. And that someone was Bran. He clearly saw the chaos as a perfect opportunity, assuming no one would notice. But there it was on video. He took a new dress, an expensive clutch, a couple of perfume bottles, and some cash. I was relieved to finally have the proof. Dan couldn't deny it once he saw it for himself. He called Bran up and confronted him. Instead of owning up to it, Bran flipped out and called me a B*TCH for recording him. I was so furious I wanted to slap him right then and there, but I kept my cool and waited to see how Dan would handle it. Dan didn't disappoint. This was about a year into our relationship, and we were serious. He slapped Bran across the face for insulting me and told him to apologize. But Bran? He acted like the victim. He accused me of invading their privacy and trying to ruin the bond he had with his brother. He admitted he stole from me on purpose, hoping it would push me out of their lives. He truly believed Dan would side with him and kick me out. But that backfired. Dan kicked Bran out instead. After that, I decided to move out, not wanting to come between 2 brothers. I was just a girlfriend of a year, after all. But Dan told me it wasn't about how long we'd been together, it was about doing what was right. And Bran had crossed a line. That moment really solidified our relationship. It built a foundation of trust and respect between us. Dan's parents tried to change his mind and get him to take Bran back in, but he stood firm. Fast forward to now, Bran lost his job during the pandemic and can't afford his bills. He wants us to let him move in. We've got a 3-bedroom house, and since our kids still share a room, there's 1 spare room left. But they're growing up fast, and it won't be long before each of them needs their own space. The kicker? Bran has a wife and a 5-year-old son. He's insisting they take the extra room, and his kid shares with ours. But that room isn't big enough for 3 kids, and honestly, I don't want his son around mine. That kid is spoiled beyond belief. He's never even been to our house, and thank goodness for that. I've never seen Bran's kid behave decently, not once. Every time we visited my in-laws, that child would be running wild, no manners, no boundaries, and his parents, especially his mom, wouldn't lift a finger to correct him. In fact, it's like they didn't even see it happening. And honestly, that's the last kind of energy I want around my own kids or in my home. When Bran first reached out to Dan about moving in, Dan told him no straight away. But then Bran brought their mom, my mother-in-law, into the picture to try and sway him. Bran's been milking his sob story, trying to play the sympathy card hard so he can wiggle his way into our home. He used to work in retail, but when the pandemic hit, the whole industry took a major blow, and he lost his job. He lived off his savings for about a year. Just when things started looking up and he began applying for new jobs, the next wave hit, and retail shut down all over again. Now, he's come back around, asking to stay with us. Dan said no at first. But ever since my mother-in-law started weighing in, I can feel the tide shifting. I'm worried Dan's going to give in. And this isn't just about some old grudge. Even after being married into this family for 12 years, there's always been tension between me and Bran. I can't say much about his wife, we've barely spoken, but Bran? He's been a jerk to me from day one. His kid is spoiled and undisciplined, and honestly, I don't know how to navigate this without turning it into a bigger mess. Update 1, answering a few questions from the last post. Some of you asked what happened to Bran after Dan kicked him out. Well, once Dan told him to leave, Bran moved back into his college dorm. He barely kept in touch with Dan and had absolutely no communication with me until we announced our engagement. That's when the drama started. Bran was the first to throw shade. He told Dan's parents I was bossy and controlling, and he didn't stop even after we got married. Now, our wedding was set up so all my sisters and friends were bridesmaids, and all of Dan's brothers and friends were groomsmen, so there really wasn't a clean way to exclude Bran. I agreed to let him be part of the ceremony, but we kept our distance from each other the whole time. Did Bran invite us to his wedding? Nope. He did a quick courthouse ceremony, and the only people from the family who were there were my in-laws. We were told it was just a small, simple event. But the family gossip says the real reason we weren't invited was money. Bran was broke, and his wife doesn't work, so everything fell on him. Still does, apparently. Now that my mother-in-law is involved, things have gotten even more complicated. She's been pushing Dan hard, trying to guilt him into letting Bran move in. At first, Dan ignored it, but eventually, he started to cave. He came to me and admitted that the pressure from his family was getting to him. He asked me very hesitantly if I'd consider letting Bran live with us. I told him straight up, we need to talk through a few things first. For starters, how long would Bran and his family even be staying? No one knows when this pandemic is going to let up, and there's no guarantee he'll find a job anytime soon. Also, we may not be paying extra rent to add 3 people to the house, but we sure would see a jump in grocery bills and utilities. I asked Dan if we could even afford to feed that many mouths. He said, honestly, no. I told him we can't be in a situation where our kids eat while Bran's kid goes hungry just because their dad can't provide. That's not fair to anyone. And then there's the kitchen. I work. Bran's wife doesn't. I won't be able to monitor what she's using or how. It's not just about personal space or bad blood, it's about logistics. Things have to be discussed and agreed on before we make any big decisions. Dan knew I wasn't okay with it, but he also knew my concerns were valid. He promised that the next time Bran or his mom called, he'd bring up all these points and see if they had any kind of plan or solution. I'm really hoping Dan stays grounded here and doesn't let guilt push him into something we're not prepared for. Yes, we're both employed, and thank God for that, but with the way things keep changing, new variants, rising costs, we need to save. We can't take on extra burdens, especially not for people who've never treated us with love or respect. And there's one more thing I haven't brought up to Dan yet, but I will if things keep moving in this direction. My in-laws live in a big 2-bedroom place. One of the rooms is packed with old junk and unused stuff. They could easily share a room and turn the storage space into a bedroom or play area for Bran's kid. If my mother-in-law is so desperate to help her son, then why isn't she offering her own home? This double standard is getting hard to ignore. Update 2. So Dan had that conversation with Bran and laid out all the concerns we discussed about expenses, groceries, how long they'd be staying, the logistics of sharing space. And just like I feared, Bran doesn't plan to contribute anything financially. Not 1 cent. He said he simply can't afford it. I was floored. How has he been supporting his family this whole time? Dan told him we couldn't take on the cost of 3 extra people, especially with so much uncertainty ahead. And then, a day later, my mother-in-law called Dan, saying we all needed to sort this out. She insisted Bran was in a serious bind and that, as family, we had a duty to help. She tried to strike a compromise. She brought Bran into the call and said, let them move in first, and they'll figure things out later. When Bran tried to object, probably worried he'd have to make promises, she cut him off and told him to stay quiet. Her words sounded sneaky, like they had no real plan except to get inside the house first. I was listening to the entire conversation, and I told Dan right then and there, this can't happen. Their intentions aren't honest. Dan muted the call so we could talk privately. Meanwhile, Bran, thinking Dan had hung up, started cursing me out. Bran didn't hold back when he thought Dan had ended the call. He told their mom I was a manipulative B*TCH who was stopping my husband from helping his own brother. I heard every word. So did Dan. Bran went on, saying, I told you, Mom, she's always been a control freak. She's turned Dan into a puppet. She never liked how close I was to him. She's the one who made Dan kick me out of that apartment with those fake accusations about me stealing. There was nothing left to wonder about after that. Dan unmuted the call and calmly said he had heard everything and that there was absolutely no way Bran was ever moving into our house. Right after Dan ended the call, my mother-in-law called me separately. I figured she'd be upset, but her tone shocked me. She asked, what did you even gain by putting my son through all this? He's already going through so much, and now you're adding to it. What's the harm in letting him use your spare room? It's not like they're criminals, stealing food and belongings. I was still reeling from hearing Bran curse me out, and here she was, defending him like he was innocent. She didn't even call him out for using the B word on me. I lost my cool. I told her straight up, if she was so moved by her son's struggles, why didn't she offer her house? They've got an extra bedroom and a storage room. What's stopping her? She didn't expect that. After stammering for a bit, she said that my father-in-law, Phil, is an old man and gets headaches when there's too much noise. And with Bran's 5-year-old being the whirlwind that he is, it would just be too much for Phil to handle. And there it was, the truth. She knew exactly what kind of chaos Bran's kid brings, and she didn't want it under her roof. Total hypocrisy. She expects me to live with it, but she can't handle her own grandchild for the sake of peace and quiet? I pointed all that out, and she got defensive. Said I was making assumptions and falsely accusing her of things that weren't true. She said Phil was in his 80s, and even small disturbances made him anxious. I said, well, don't we all deserve peace in our own homes? And yet you're trying to rip that away from us. Then she said something that honestly made me scoff. She claimed having Bran's son live with us could actually be a great opportunity for him to learn some discipline by being around my kids. I said, and what if it goes the other way? What if my kids pick up bad habits instead? You know how kids are, they absorb the worst behaviors faster than the good ones. When she couldn't argue anymore, she snapped. Bran was right about you. You're manipulative and strong-headed. No wonder my son can't think for himself, you've taken over. I shot back, maybe he listens to me because I talk sense, not garbage like you all do. She cursed me out and hung up. Later that day, I told Dan everything about the call. He told me not to dwell on it too much. We'd already made our decision, we weren't letting them in. He just hoped we'd stay firm, no matter how hard the pressure from his family got. Update 3. About a week later, I got a call from Bran's wife. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect. But she surprised me. She was calm, polite, and there was something about her voice that felt sincere, not fake or put on. She told me she knew about everything that had happened. Her tone didn't carry any resentment, which honestly made me feel guilty. I mean, after everything, here I was denying them a place to stay, and she was still being kind. Still, she didn't waver. She said she understood my hesitation and that she didn't want to impose. But the truth was, they were out of money. Their savings had dried up just trying to keep up with rent and essentials. She told me she'd recently taken up a job at a restaurant. She didn't say what exactly, but I assumed it wasn't anything fancy. She's not a chef, so maybe she's working the front counter or doing prep work. What really hit me was when she said she's been asking Bran to take whatever work he can find, even if it's temporary or outside his usual field. But he flat out refuses. Says he won't do odd jobs. He'd rather stay unemployed than take something beneath him. That part honestly made my jaw drop. I won't lie, hearing her talk like that got to me. I started to feel for her. But she was very clear she didn't want us to take them in, because if Bran got used to being waited on, he'd never change. That line stuck with me. Then she told me about an apartment they were trying to lease. Apparently, the place was being offered at a reduced rate due to the pandemic's effect on retail properties. It was a good deal and would help them cut back on rent, but they didn't have the upfront funds. She asked if I could lend her some money, just a loan, and said she'd repay it in installments. I told her I couldn't say yes right away, and that I needed to talk it over with Dan. She understood and asked if I could keep the conversation private. She said Bran would be furious if he found out she reached out to me for help, especially after the falling out. She told me we never had much of a relationship, but she always felt a kind of warmth toward me and believed I might be willing to help. I promised to keep it between us and said I'd talk to Dan about it. When I brought it up with Dan, the first thing he asked me was, "Do you really believe her?" He wasn't rude, just cautious. He said it could be Bran pulling the strings behind the scenes, trying to get money from us through her, since he knew we'd never help him directly. Honestly, it made sense. So I decided to let it go. I never followed up. Life got busy, work and the kids took over, and the whole thing slipped my mind. Then one day, I was just scrolling through social media, and something reminded me of that conversation. I messaged her, asking if she'd been able to get the lease money together. She replied, "No, that's all." I felt awful. I started typing out an apology, ready to admit I'd forgotten to respond. But before I could hit send, she messaged again. She said she understood that she couldn't expect anything from me after what Bran had done to us. That's why she never followed up. That message sent a chill down my spine. I felt genuinely terrible. So I called her right then and told her I was sorry. She was still soft-spoken and kind, didn't ask for anything, didn't guilt me. Just thanked me for reaching out. I offered to transfer the money and asked for her account info. She refused. Said it was okay, that they were being forced to move out soon anyway, and the landlord might have already leased the place to someone else. I urged her to double-check right away. She was hesitant, but I reassured her I trusted her, and I was ready to help. She said okay and hung up. A little while later, she called me back. She said the apartment was still available, and actually, the rent had dropped even more. The owner was struggling to find tenants because of the ongoing COVID mess, so he was willing to go even lower just to get someone in. I let out a sigh of relief. I went ahead and transferred the money to her right then and there, told her to lock in the deal with the landlord before someone else came along. I didn't even run it by Dan this time. I was certain this felt like the right thing to do, and I trusted her. After everything was signed and sorted, she called me again just to thank me. She promised she'd repay the loan in installments. I asked her what she told Bran about the money. She said she lied, told him she borrowed it from her boss and that it would be deducted from her paycheck every month. She said if she told him the money came from me, he'd flat out refuse to accept it. Then I asked what their plan was after moving out of their current place. She told me she was thinking about going to stay with her mom out in the suburbs. It was a long way from both the city and her job, and the house wasn't really big enough for 3 people, but her mom had still agreed to take them in. The only catch? Bran didn't want to go. He was trying to work on my mother-in-law again, hoping to convince her to let them stay with her instead, but she still wasn't budging. I almost asked her how Bran had managed to raise such a spoiled child, one who doesn't listen to a word anyone says, but before I could say it, she brought it up herself. She said Bran had ruined the kid completely. He won't listen to her, and anytime she tries to discipline him, he throws tantrums and even yells at her. She said Bran doesn't let her parent at all, and when she tries, it just backfires. I wanted to ask her why she ever married someone like that, or why she hasn't left him yet, but I held my tongue. That's not something you ask in a moment like that, especially after everything she just shared. Still, in my heart, I believe he probably never let her work until now, kept her dependent. And now that she's earning her own money? I think it's just a matter of time before she sees him for who he is and finally kicks him out of her life. She told me the lease would be in her name, not Bran's. That pretty much confirmed it for me. She's planning to break free. And honestly, I hope she does. When that day comes, I'll be happy for her. She deserves so much better.